almost didn't make it. Look at the 10-second countdown for the camera. What's up, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Ask the King. And I have to personally apologize that it took me so long to getting around to doing another episode. Originally, this was scheduled for January 6th, but due to extenuating circumstances such as the Game of the Year awards, sorry, I'm setting my clock so that I know that I have to end this in at least like 25 minutes. The Game of the Year awards, and also the stuff last week that unfortunately was going on with Blip, I had to basically postpone. And so now, actually, I think this is maybe a good thing because I have a significant number of really good questions this week that I think people would be interested in hearing me answer. So let's get started. First question here is from Red for Dead 3KB, and he asks, what is your most anticipated game of 2011? And that's really hard for me to answer because, to me, when I think, games, I don't really categorize them as just video games generically because there's so much variety these days. I would probably say, like, for example, my most anticipated fighting game of this year is probably Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I can't wait to get my hands on it. I played a beta edition of it at New York Comic Con earlier this well, not earlier this year, it was last year in October. Was really like kind of taken aback because it is definitely a far cry from Marvel vs. Capcom 2, but it still seems to retain a lot of that kind of gameplay style, and I'm dying to play it. If we're talking like role-playing games, I'd probably say maybe either Mass Effect 3, which is more action-oriented, or maybe Elder Scrolls 5. I'm not sure. If you're talking like action-adventure, probably Uncharted 3. So really there's just a lot of good games coming out this year, and I'm really anticipating a lot of them. It's really hard for me to narrow it down to one. But I am pleased because I think last year, until like the fourth quarter, besides maybe like Mass Effect 2 and Heavy Rain, there really weren't a lot of like blockbuster games that people were anticipating. This year it seems like there's a lot of games already on the table coming up that look like they're going to be really good and make this a really good year. So I am pleased, and I can't wait to get my hands on some of these games. The next question is from Angel Demon Fusion, and he says, what is the major difference between Japanese and American games? It's a good question. Well, Angel Demon Fusion, Japanese games are usually in Japanese, and American games are traditionally in the English language. Alright, the next question is from MetaDragon45. And the question is, what is one of the most anticipated games that you ever wanted? So he's not saying for 2011, he's saying of all time. Or what are some of the most anticipated games? Well, two in particular come to mind from my youth, and one was obviously one that a lot of people were dying for on home consoles, and that was Street Fighter 2. We were all playing the game to death in the early 90s in arcades, and we were like, when the hell can we play this at home? And then when it finally came out for the SNES, oh my god, it was like, we finally have the arcade at home. And really, Street Fighter 2 was one of the earliest games that the home console version was very, at least, I don't want to say it was arcade perfect, absolutely not, but it was close, at least significantly close to what the arcade edition was like. Now don't get me wrong, obviously the sound was way less, I don't know how to say, robust maybe. It definitely wasn't as good as the arcade. The graphics were definitely a downgrade, but the core gameplay was there, and I think that's really what, this was the beginning of the time when home ports of games started to become much more accurate to the arcade versions. Delicious. On the flip side of that, there's another game that I really remember anticipating heavily, and it's Final Fantasy III. Now, for those of you that weren't around back in the day like I was, Final Fantasy III is actually the American name for Final Fantasy VI in the United States. And back then, I remember playing Final Fantasy II. I was introduced to it by one of my cousins, and I was like, wow, this game is amazing. It was actually the first role-playing game I had ever played, besides Dragon Warrior. I did play Dragon Warrior on the NES. And I said, wow, this is crazy. It's such a step up from Dragon Warrior, and I really like this concept. The story's great, the characters are great. And I remember so just heavily anticipating the next one to come out, and being that, if you don't know this, Final Fantasy II is actually Final Fantasy IV in Japan. So really, when Final Fantasy III came out, it was 2 games later. So imagine, God of War 1 and God of War 3, what leaps and bounds between those games graphic-wise and everything like that. Imagine that being the next iteration. Imagine you never played God of War 2. You'd be like, holy shit, what a jump here, you know, from the last one. And that's really how I felt, and I really anticipated. I loved Final Fantasy 3. So yeah, I'd probably say Street Fighter 2, Final Fantasy 3, the most anticipated home console games of my youth. Next question is from Remix, and this question is, who's your favorite character, Bugs Bunny or Mickey Mouse? And this is a no-brainer for me. It's got to be Bugs Bunny. Because Mickey Mouse and the Disney characters, to me, they always seemed like they were more geared towards young kids. And I myself always saw myself as like a more mature person. Even when I was a kid, I liked more adult humor. And Bugs Bunny has that. Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, you know, they can have those more adult tones to them. Even watching a Bugs Bunny cartoon, I feel like an adult and a kid could sit there and watch the cartoon and laugh for completely different reasons. As opposed to Mickey Mouse, it's like the kids love it, and the parents are like, all right, when the hell does this end? You know, so definitely for me, you know, Bugs Bunny. And then as time went on, and they had things like Tiny Toon Adventures and Animaniacs. Those were the cartoons I grew up with, and I loved those. And that's the kind of humor that I like, the more adult themed. Next question is from Vector Prime, and he says, if you were a porn star, what would your name be? Well, a lot of people don't know this about my past, but I actually was a porn star for a very short time, and the Rectal Rooter made his name and his mark on the porn industry, and there's a reason why I can't go back. Alright, so the next question, this one was asked by many people, so it's a common question, which is why I'm not going to name a particular name, but the question is, have you seen the announcement about Mortal Kombat, the special editions, and notably the Mortal Kombat joystick? What do you think? Yes, I saw the announcement about Mortal Kombat. Yes, I'm going to play it. I've said that numerous times. I don't know why people don't know that yet. But yeah, I am interested in the new Mortal Kombat, which is a return to the classic of 2D style gameplay. But the joystick, I've got pretty much just negative things to say about it. First of all, for quite a while now, America, at least I'd say for the past 4 to 5 years, has pretty much adopted a Japanese arcade control standard. If you look at any of the joysticks that have been released, Mad Catz, hell, even the one Hori, they're all Japanese style. And so, yes, I understand that Mortal Kombat is an American fighting game, but people are now, who have been playing fighting games, are used to this Japanese style of control. And if you saw the Mortal Kombat stick, it's the traditional old school style, American style joystick, which has the back top. It's got the really crappy, I think they're called concave. I get concave and convex confused all the time. But the old style American buttons, which aren't as responsive as Japanese buttons, and it is the classic Mortal Kombat layout, which is basically, you know, high punch, high kick, low punch, low kick, and block and a run button. And I'm like, okay, that's great, and that was great back in the day, but do I really want to buy a joystick that's only going to be for Mortal Kombat? Because let's face it, you can't play Street Fighter with that stick. You can't play other games with that stick. At least with other fighting games, the 6-button classic layout works for most other fighting games, and to be completely honest, anyone who's been playing Mortal Kombat on a joystick for the past 5 to 10 years has been playing it on a 6-button style stick, and we've all adjusted to maybe, oh, okay, this button's block instead of the button in the center of all the other ones, and this button's run instead of the other one. You know, you get used to that layout. So I honestly don't know that many people who are going to be interested in this stick. I think it was a good idea, but I think what they should have done is pulled the fans and the players and said, if you were to get a Mortal Kombat stick, what would the button layout be like? And I don't think anyone would have said, yeah, give me that traditional arcade layout that I can't use on any other game ever because it doesn't work. I mean, I think it was a really poor choice. So, I don't know what the game's going to be like to begin with, but I can tell you this, I'm probably not buying that stick. I don't want a stick that I can only play for one game, especially if the game ends up sucking. Now I have a joystick sitting around that I'm never going to use again, so that's pretty dumb, in my opinion. Okay, the next question is from Kirby Barbecue, or Kirby BBQ, and the question is, what is your opinion on new players in the Street Fighter community? Do you think that the amount of people trying to get into the series is a good or bad thing? And this is a loaded question. Let me just say it, put it that way. Let me get a sip of water before I start with this one. Because my answer, it's going to be a mixed bag, and I hope that people will take this into consideration. That I was a tournament player, late '90s, early 2000s. Really didn't come into my. I mean, for Marvel versus Capcom 1 and 2, sure, back then I was, constantly playing it and traveling to play it, but really didn't come into my prime until the mid 2000s with Super Turbo, where I really started winning consistently tournaments and or placing high. And so for me, I come from a school of, listen, fighting games are not easy games to jump into by any means. It takes time and dedication to master the control scheme, to master everything that's going on with the game. And by far, if you started playing these games in the 90s and are still playing them today, it's definitely easier to jump into them because you've got the basics down. You know how to throw a Hadouken. You know how to do a Shoryuken. You understand charge moves and their properties. And those things have carried through traditionally from the earliest fighting games like Street Fighter 2 all the way up until, Street Fighter 4 and Marvel vs. Capcom 3. They still stand true. So, for me, I'm more of a fan of, make the control scheme difficult, because that way there's a learning curve and only the best of the best will compete. But unfortunately, that's not really where games have gone in the past couple of years. Now, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, when Street Fighter 4 was released 2 years ago, basically the game was released with a completely new control scheme from the previous Street Fighter games. It's much more control friendly to the casual gamer, and I think the reason they did this was because they understood that not everyone was going to have a competition joystick to play on, and they really wanted to widen and broaden their audience for Street Fighter. And so what they did is they actually made the inputs for special moves extremely lenient, okay? And I've talked about this before, but just as a recap, basically in Street Fighter 4, let's say for example you want to do a Shoryuken, which is a dragon punch, whatever you want to call it. In traditional Street Fighter, you have to do the real motion, which is towards your opponent on the joystick, down on the joystick, and then down towards, plus a punch button, alright? So you have to do this on the joystick to get it to work. In Street Fighter 4, there are shortcuts to do every single move in the game. So if you want to do Shoryuken, you want to know what you have to do, you can double tap. I'm not even kidding. You don't have to do a rounded motion at all. You can double tap a particular angle and press punch, and a Shoryuken will come out. And for some people, this is great. For people who can't afford a joystick, for people who don't like joysticks, who've played on pads their whole life. I mean, there's a whole generation of gamers who weren't arcade competitors, who didn't have a joystick and buttons and weren't able to play, or just didn't play in that style. I said earlier that Street Fighter 2 was one of my favorite games, most anticipated games as a child. Well, there were people who only owned the home versions of these games, so all they ever had was an SNES pad. And I've spoken about this earlier, and I took some flack for it for the way that I said it, because I think that I said it the wrong way. I talk about players like Zangief, who plays on a pad. A Zangief player who did extremely well at Evolution 2010 and Super Street Fighter 4, playing on a gamepad. And there was also a lot of controversy with another player, and I forgive me because I completely forgot his name, who won HD Remix, Super Turbo HD Remix at Evolution on a gamepad. He was a Zangief player as well. And the thing is, back in the day, good luck playing with these characters on a D-pad. I mean, it was just impossible. You couldn't pull off the complex motions, the timing, the reversals, the combos. It just wasn't possible on a D-pad. You needed a competition joystick to do it. And these days, because of these more relaxed inputs, it's extremely easy to do these things on D-pad. It's very viable to become a tournament competitor playing on a pad. Now, some people would argue this is good because it's broadened the audience for Street Fighter. It's bringing in a whole new generation of gamers, and it's basically bringing Street Fighter more into the mainstream. But on the flip side of that, there's a whole other group of people, like myself, who've been around for quite a long time, who understand what it is to be a tournament competitor and how difficult it is. And some people don't agree. They on the flip side, they're like, listen, you're dumbing down the game. You're making it so that any Joe Schmo can learn these abusable tactics because it's so easy to do it now. Before, you had to actually learn the timing, the motion. Now it's just like double tap. Oh, it's so freaking easy to do. And you're dumbing down the game, and it's making the game more diluted and not as skillful on a tournament level. And I guess my best argument for this would be the original Street Fighter 4 that came out had Sagat as the most overpowered character, and the reason was, number one, he had the best focus attack dash cancel in the game. It was low risk, extremely high reward, and extremely high damage. And number two, because he had that, and because the inputs were so easy to do, almost anyone could do it. You didn't have to do a Dragon Punch motion to do it. You could just keep tapping. Like, people would be attacking you with like jab, 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 you know, doing their combo string, and you could just mash diagonal on your joystick and punch, and if they fucked up, that was it. It would come out, and that's it. You could win the round just by mashing like this on a joystick. I'm sorry, but, you know, in a tournament atmosphere, you shouldn't be, oh, mash, 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 and just because I picked this certain character and because they dumbed down the controls, you can completely reverse the entire round if I make a slight miscalculation in the timing of my hit string, and you win because of it. It's bullshit. And it really did dumb down the competition of Street Fighter 4. Now this was fixed, obviously, in Super Street Fighter 4. Yes, that you can still do that, but Sagat was significantly toned down. That FADC is nowhere near as powerful now, and people have found other things to do to replace that. But in my opinion, I mean, I come from the hardcore. I come from a school where, you know, I took my licks. I took my decade of getting my ass handed to me in arcades before I finally started, you know, becoming the level of competitor that I am today. And for me, it's frustrating to see these people, and I call them kids even though they're not necessarily kids. Don't take it as disrespect. And Vangeef, don't take it as any disrespect when I said, oh, Vangeef, you know, he won an Evo, I want to go back and kick everyone's ass. What I was basically saying was, I want to go back to a time when, you know, it really took a competitor who was dedicated, who learned the game, who learned every aspect of the game, who learned the complex motions, controls the hardest stuff in the game, and that's why they won. Not just because you learned one abusable strategy and you abused a really easy, lax control scheme, and all of a sudden you're dominating everyone. It's disappointing, and not to take anything away from players like Vangeef or the guy who won HD Remix, because obviously what they did, they saw what was there, they learned what was there, and they rolled with it and they won. And all the more props to you. That's what a tournament level competitor does. They find the best stuff in a game and they use it to win. But for me, it's disappointing to see, for example, Zangief winning HD Remix. Let me tell you something. Zangief will never win a competitive Super Turbo arcade tournament unless the people just don't understand the game or there's no good players there. Zangief is one of the worst characters in Super Turbo, and it's because of his limitations. He's very difficult, or has a very difficult time against projectile characters. He's very limited in his range, and really he's slow overall. So compared to the other people in the game, yeah, it's really hard to win with Zangief. So I would, if someone's going to win with Zangief, outplay me. Don't get fucking, you know, spinning pile drivers every 2 seconds because the control scheme's so fucking retardedly easy now, or because someone made a ridiculous remix version of a game that makes everything so freaking easy to do that you can just dominate everyone. I mean, it's stupid. And that's my opinion. I'm sure for the majority of people out there, especially my fan base who's a younger fan base, you're going to disagree, and that's perfectly fine. But again, for me, someone who's put in the time and dedication, who grew up with these games, and that's why I am as good as I am, it's frustrating to see these people who, you know, oh, my first fighting game was Street Fighter 4, and I went to EVO and I made top 8. What the fuck? Like, you put in a couple months of practice and all of a sudden you're dominating everyone? That's pretty crazy. And I think it speaks volumes on what's going on with Street Fighter right now, and the fact that anyone can jump in, and actually if you do dedicate yourself, you can win. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, that is kind of annoying when, you know, there used to be this learning curve, there used to be this, I don't know, and I don't want to say elitist, but almost, you know, you knew when someone put in the time and dedication to become a tournament level player. Today it's just like, what the fuck? Like, people are just coming out of nowhere and dominating. It's like, who are these people? And that's kind of what I was saying a couple months ago when I made the comment about Vangeef. It's like, wow, I mean, I respect Zangief. Here's a guy who picked, you know, a character who was toned down in Super Street Fighter 4. He's not even as good as he was in the original Street Fighter 4. And beats Justin Wong, dominates at EVO, tears through everyone with a character who's not supposedly as good as he was in the first game. And that's definitely respect-worthy. But at the same time, who's Zangief? You know what I mean? Who was he before Super Street Fighter 4? I don't know. I never heard of him. And maybe it's because he put in the time and dedication, or maybe it's because it's a lot easier to play the competitive fighting games these days than it was back in the day. I don't know. But that's just my take on it. You know, it's great that there's thousands and thousands of people now who have joined the competitive fighting game scene. But at the same time, I reminisce about the old days. You know what I mean? But for me, I don't know. Let's see what happens this year with Marvel 3 and stuff like that. I'm interested to see how these games play. If I dedicate myself to a game like Marvel vs. Capcom 3, if I can significantly, you know, do better than people who just find these abusable strategies and these input, you know, shortcuts, and they end up dominating because of these stupid easy mode ways to win. I don't know, but we'll see what happens. I hope no one took that the wrong way. That's just my honest opinion. It's different from the way it was back in the day, you know. Back in the 90s when you had to, you know, wait in line freaking 20 minutes to even get your hands on the controls, and when you got there, you really had to do your absolute best, because if you fucked up, you got to wait another 20 minutes to play, and going every week and hammering it out and playing the locals and becoming the best at your local arcade, and then going to a tournament and learning all this new stuff. It's not like that anymore. Now, you just sit at home, you go online, and you fucking, sure, it lags, but you see the best stuff, you watch videos on YouTube of how to play the games, and within, you know, a month of just studying, you can actually become a good player. It's just so different from the way it used to be that it's a totally different ball game for me. So that's my opinion on the subject. I definitely like the fact that there's so many people playing Street Fighter, but it's just so different than it was back in the day. It's I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I would love to go to EVO this year. I would love to go, you know, go through the tournament scene leading up to EVO, the EVO qualifier series, and see how stuff is. I mean, I understand there are so many freaking tournaments everywhere now that it's like I go to Shoryuken.com and you go to tournaments and events. I can't even find a tournament I want. I can't even find the ones in my area. I can't find the majors. I can't find jack shit, because there's hundreds of tournaments all across the country. And it's a double-edged sword. It's a great thing that there's that level of competition, but it's a bad thing when you're, you know, looking for the best. So let's see what happens this year. It's going to be definitely a different experience. I'm actually coming up on about 25 minutes here, so I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to split the video, and then we're going to go into the next section. And I don't know, this might be a long one because I got quite a bunch of questions I didn't even get to talk about yet. So come back for part 2, and I'll see you then.